Chapter 11, Struggles. School is over now, and Miss Bloom promised to visit us in 3rd grade, which made me feel better about saying goodbye. Also, Colleen and I are going to be in the same class next year, Alien Phase 2, which I'm excited about. Since school ended, I've been doing a lot of things. I went on vacation with my mom and dad, and we visited the beach every day. We had a great time, and even though I brought my notebook to write in, I didn't because I was so busy making sand castles and eating ice cream. But then, when we were getting ready to come home, even though I told my mom I'd double-check that I'd packed everything, I didn't because I was imagining that the squeaky wheels on my suitcase were mice with superhuman or mouse strength. So I left my notebook in our hotel room, and it was terrible because what if someone else found it and pretended it was theirs and published it and became a best-selling author with my stories? Luckily, this didn't happen, and the hotel mailed it back to me, which is very nice of them. But I only just arrived, which means that I'm really behind with my writing. After I got back from vacation, I started camp. Camp is a lot of fun. Colleen's there too, and we get to swim in the community pool and play games in a big field. We also do arts and crafts, and last week I learned how to make a picture frame and a friendship bracelet, which are 2 excellent skills to have. But not even camp or getting my notebook back could make this week any better. On Tuesday, I helped my mom pack her bag for the hospital, which was just a little, only slightly fun. I wanted my mom to pack her high heels because they're great and you can barely see where they got scratched in the dirt. Plus, if you're going to insist on having a new baby, you might as well be fancy about it. My mom didn't agree with this, but she promised that she'd wear heels to the Blob's 1-month party. When a baby is 1 month old, you have a big banquet in Chinatown to celebrate. I love banquets. Waiters bring out new plates of delicious food all the time. And you eat at tables that have a big circle in the middle that spins. Spinning is really fast, and trying to spear food with your chopsticks while it goes is an excellent game, though sometimes it makes a mess on your great aunt's party dress. While we packed, we talked about what was going to happen later that week, a sleepover at Colleen's house. When Colleen invited me for a sleepover, it was hard to know what to say. She and I have been talking about me sleeping over for a long time because even though sleepovers at my house are fun, Colleen's parents have a machine that makes waffles, and her mom said that if I stay over, she'll make us some for breakfast. Also, Colleen has lots of board games, and we plan to stay up all night and play them. This has always sounded fun, and I really wanted to go. But then I remember the last time I tried to stay over and how scared I was. And worse, how hard it was to explain to Colleen that I was scared of being in the dark. And even though Colleen said she was sorry for calling me a baby that day on the bus, I still think about it sometimes, and I want her to know that I'm not a baby. I'm her best friend. That's why when Colleen sleeps over at my house, I do things like hide my nightlight and ask my mom to leave the hall light on and the door open a little and to say it's for Colleen so she'll know where the bathroom is. So I said yes to Colleen and the sleepover, and then I thought about asking my mom if she could tell Colleen's parents that I couldn't go after all. I invented an excellent story to use as an excuse involving the chicken pox and a hot air balloon with a bank robber inside. But when I got home that day, Colleen's mom had already called my mom to schedule everything, and my mom told me how proud she was of me for saying yes, which was nice. And she gave me a hug and told me that she and my dad would always be there to come and get me if I needed them, which was nicer. So while my mom packed for the hospital, I started to plan what I would pack for Colleen's. My dad had to work late that night, so my mom and I had a special evening all to ourselves. After we packed our suitcase, we ate pizza and played checkers, though we got bored and ended up making a game to see how many checker pieces we could balance on Mom's stomach. The answer is a lot. The next morning, my dad walked me to the camp bus stop, and he and I sang all our favorite songs on the way, and then Colleen and I were paired together for a relay race. It was a fun day, even if I was still nervous about the sleepover later in the week and wondering if I could bring my unicorn poster with me, because at least that would mean I wouldn't have to worry about Colleen's closet. But I was trying to forget about those worries, and mostly I was doing a very good job and having an excellent time, until just as Colleen and I were getting in line for the bus to go home and making up a story about how we are brave explorers on a jungle safari who could talk to lions, one of the counselors came over and said, "Cilla, there's someone here for you." I looked around, and there by the door was my Grandma Jenkins, and even though she was trying to smile, she had a worried look on her face. Suddenly I didn't feel brave like an explorer anymore. My Grandma Jenkins came over and gave me a big hug and said, "Everything's fine, Cilla. We're going to go see your mom and dad in the hospital. I'll explain everything in the car." My mom hadn't had the blob, which at first I was relieved to hear because I really don't want it to come yet, even if it Good timing because my birthday isn't for another 2 weeks. But she was on something called bed rest, which meant that she needed to lie down all the time, and she had to stay at the hospital so the doctors and nurses could check on her until the baby was born. It took me a minute to understand what my grandma was saying because I was busy feeling angry at the blob. But then what she said finally sank in. Wait, I said as I realized what she meant, and my voice was the small one that comes out sometimes that I don't like. Mom's not coming home? Not until your sister is born, my grandma said in a voice that was different from her normal one too, like she was trying to be very soft and calm. It shouldn't be too long now, and while she's gone, we'll all be there to look after you. Will Dad come home, I asked, my voice still small. My grandma didn't seem to mind, even though she hates mumbling and likes to say things like, speak up, dear, or enunciate, please, whenever you're too quiet. Your father's going to spend most of his time at the hospital, so he can keep your mother company, she answered. He's already packed a bag with your things, and you're going to spend tonight with your grandfather and me, and then tomorrow night with your other grandparents. He's told me all about your sleepover plans, too, for the night after. And you'll get to visit your mother every afternoon in the hospital. I didn't know what to say, so instead, I just looked out the window. Cilla, my grandma said, are you all right? Do you want to talk about it? No, I said, and I didn't. It's going to be fine, she said, but I didn't say anything back. I didn't like the hospital. It was big and gray with lots of small windows, and inside everything was white, and all the people wore funny outfits. It didn't seem like a place that my mom would like, and I held my grandma's hand very tight, especially when a man came by with a bed that was on wheels, because even though this was a fun idea in theory, and I bet racing down a hill on a bed with wheels would be great, I didn't like the idea of my mom being in one of those beds instead of being home with me, so I hid my face in my grandma's sweater until we were past him. When we got to my mom's hallway, I saw my dad and Grandpa Jenkins talking by a doorway, and I was maybe a little bit rude because I didn't say hi to Grandpa Jenkins right away. I was too busy running to my dad and getting picked up in a big hug. Grandpa Jenkins seemed okay with this, though. My mom's room wasn't as bad as I thought it'd be, and even though her bed had wheels, it also had a button that could make the end where her head was higher or lower, which was fun. Grandpa Jenkins sat in one corner flipping through TV channels. There was a TV hanging from the ceiling, which was very impressive, and Grandma Jenkins sat in the other corner reorganizing my mom's suitcase. It's okay, my mom whispered to my dad. If she doesn't have a project, she'll drive me up a wall. I wondered how this would work, especially because my mom is very heavy because of the blob right now, so probably she'd fall down from the wall. But it didn't seem like the time to ask. My dad sat next to the bed and helped me up, and my mom and I cuddled. So I decided to feel better, especially because when I lay next to her, I didn't have to look at the needles that were taped to her arm. She said they were good because they were giving her medicine, but I didn't like them at all. Do you still want to stay at Colleen's, my dad asked? You don't have to if you don't want to. All your grandparents would love to have you. Colleen's is fine, I said quietly, but I wish I could be home with you. The baby will be here before you know it, my mom said, trying to make me smile. Maybe even tomorrow, and then we'll all be together. Okay, I whispered. I know, it's hard, sweetheart, Mom said. You're being so brave. This was nice to hear, but I didn't think I believed it. That night, Grandma and Grandpa Jenkins took me to their house, and my Grandma Jenkins cooked steak and spinach and mashed potatoes, and my Grandpa Jenkins went out to buy an ice cream cake as a special treat. I got to have a bubble bath, and my Grandma Jenkins read me stories for a whole hour. Then she plugged in my dinosaur nightlight, which my dad had packed for me because he's the best. It made green and blue patterns on the wall, just like it does in my room. But it wasn't home. The next day, my yaya picked me up from camp, and we drove to the hospital to see my mom. Nene was there with almond cookies, and she and yaya and my dad sat by the window and talked in Chinese while my mom and I cuddled, and I told her all about camp that day. That night, I went home to my Nene and yaya's house. Nene cooked sausage and rice, and yaya bought white buns and dried pork for breakfast the next day. Another one of my favorite things. I sang songs with my Nene, and I drew her a picture that made her say, "Wow!" So I knew I'd done a great job. And then I helped her pull out the fold-up couch, which is a couch that turns into a bed, which is amazing. Plus, when the beds unfold, is the only time you're allowed to make a fort out of couch pillows, since no one needs them for sitting. Yaya read to me, and Nene sat by my bed and sang me favorite Chinese lullaby. And my nightlight lit the living room, and I could hear Nene and Yaya whispering in Chinese in the next room as I closed my eyes, and that's a very nice sound to fall asleep to. But it wasn't home either. The next morning, I helped Nene pack a smaller bag with my pajamas, my toothbrush, and a change of clothes. Nene reached over to my dinosaur nightlight and was about to put it in the bag when I said, "Nope, I'll leave it here." "Are you sure?" she asked. I was. I held my Nene's hand extra tight when she dropped me off at camp that morning, and I gave her a big hug goodbye. And that afternoon, I went home with Colleen's for my first ever sleepover. I spent lots of time at Colleen's house before, but this was the first time I'd unpacked my toothbrush in her bathroom or picked a towel from her closet. Colleen guessed rightly that I'd choose the towel with a rainbow-colored whale, which was very exciting. Dinner was a lot of fun, and Colleen's dad told us jokes, and Colleen and I told everyone all about the water balloon toss. It was even better than we'd hoped. We got to throw water balloons at Alien-Faced McGee, and since it was part of a game, we didn't even get in trouble. We played board games after dinner, though apparently our plan to play board games all night long was not going to happen, according to Colleen's mom. And when it was my turn to shower, Colleen let me play with the plastic cap she sometimes wears, and I pretended it was an astronaut's helmet. But there was a nervous feeling in my stomach the whole time, because this wasn't my house, and even though I'd been to Colleen's before, I still sometimes forget where things are and get lost. Finally, the moment I'd been dreading came. Colleen's mom told us that it was time for lights out, and I'd even thought I'd talked with my mom and dad that night on the phone to say hello. I apologize. And even though I talked to my mom and dad that night on the phone to say hello and I miss you, what if I got scared and wanted to go home? Colleen would think I was a baby, and then even if I did want to go, who'd come get me, and why did everything have to be so different? Colleen's mom gave us both hugs, which was very nice of her, and said goodnight. I closed my eyes and scrunched up my face as she flicked off the light. "Are you okay, Cilla?" Colleen asked. "Yes," I said, trying to be brave. I took a deep breath and opened my eyes, preparing myself for the dark. But I saw stars instead, bright and white, glowing in the dark from Colleen's ceiling. "Wow," I gasped. "You like them?" Colleen said, and it was funny because her voice sounded a little nervous. "I love them," I said. Colleen hesitated. "I thought you might think they were silly, or that they might bother you and keep you from falling asleep. The thing is, sometimes I get a little scared in the dark." I turned to look at her, my eyes big. "I'm getting better," she said quickly. "I'm only scared sometimes, I swear. I don't want you to think I'm a baby. It's just that, Colleen," I said, "I'm scared of the dark." Her eyes were big now, too. But when I slept over, I hid my nightlight, I confessed, in my sock drawer. Colleen thought this over for a minute, and then she giggled, and I giggled too. "What kind of nightlight?" she asked. "A dinosaur," I answered. "He's blue with green polka dots. I named him Herman." "I can't wait to meet him," she said, lying back on her pillows. "And then also," she said after another minute, "the stars are really fun for making up stories if you can't sleep. Sometimes I look up at them and imagine I'm in outer space." We lay there for a little while. I turned to Colleen again, and I could just see her outline under the soft glow of the ceiling. "I'm glad you're my friend, Colleen," I said in a quiet voice. "I'm glad you're my friend too, Cilla," she said back. A few minutes later, I could tell she was asleep. Colleen snores, which makes me giggle, but I giggled quietly so I wouldn't wake her up. I'm a good best friend that way. I felt a lot better, but I still missed home, and I was still worried about my mom, and this still wasn't my house. And what if I had to go to the bathroom and couldn't remember which room was Colleen's, and then had to wander through the hallway for the rest of eternity, or at least the rest of the night? So I made up a story to tell myself. It was about a baby brontosaurus who's afraid of heights, and whose best friend is a bird. His best friend is kidnapped by pt3. Sorry, I probably said that wrong. And the brontosaurus has to conquer his fears, and there's a chase scene, and he saves his friend, and he finds out he's not really a brontosaurus after all. He's a baby dragon and has wings, and he has his best friend fly off together underneath the stars, and they're very happy, and there's a car chase and explosions and aliens, and then I fell asleep and woke up to the sound of the telephone ringing. Okay, chapter 12 is called New Things. Colleen was just starting to wake up when I came running back into her room, so I helped her wake up some more by jumping onto her bed and bouncing. "My dad just called," I said in a low voice, as if it were a secret. "My mom's having the baby," and I was surprised because even though I had a nervous feeling in my stomach, I was smiling too. and Colleen gave me a big hug and started bouncing on the bed with me. And then I told her how I'd heard the phone ring and snuck downstairs and how her mom had hung up the phone and given me a big hug and told me that my mom was in labor, which means the baby is about to come, even though it's not Labor Day, which in this case I was very happy about. We ate breakfast in our pajamas. I got to help turn the handle of the waffle machine, and Colleen's dad made us hot chocolate with whipped cream on top because he said, we ate breakfast in our pajamas. I got to help turn the handles of the waffle machine, and Colleen's dad made us hot chocolate with whipped cream on top because he said it was a special occasion. I was a little quiet, but Colleen understood. After breakfast, Colleen convinced her brother Matt to play at being a baby, and she taught me how to hold him. This was a little hard because Matt is 3 and kept getting bored and wiggling and sometimes trying to do a backflip, but playing babies was actually really fun. And Colleen's mom sat on the couch reading a book, and every once in a while saying things like, not upside down, and did you just put a diaper on your brother's head? The answer to that question was yes, because Matt still wears diapers, and I wanted to see how they worked, and Colleen thought it would be funny if we practiced by making a hat. Matt liked this too, and didn't take his hat off for the rest of the morning, and Colleen's mom sighed and sounded just like my mom, which was funny. And then Colleen's older brother Josh, who was 6, wanted a turn at being the baby, plus the chance to wear a special hat. And then Matt wanted to hold the baby, so we pretended he could hold me, even though I could probably squish him, which I guess really and truly makes me a big kid. I've never spent much time playing with Colleen's brothers. Usually we try to hide from them so they won't interrupt our games, and I was surprised by how much I liked it. I even promised Matt that he could hold a real live baby when my sister came home from the hospital, and when Colleen's brothers ran off to play a different game, there's something her mom calls high energy. Colleen sat next to me and said, I didn't mean to scare you about being a big sister and all the responsibilities. It can be fun. I think you'll be really good at it. I couldn't think of anything to say, so I just put my head on her shoulder, which seemed like enough. And then all of a sudden the phone rang again, and Colleen's mom was shouting, Cilla, it's for you. Later that morning, my dad came to get me, just like he'd said he would on the phone. He gave me a big hug and spun me around and then carried me to the car, which I let him do, even if I am officially a big kid. We drove to the hospital, which I'm getting to know very well now, and I waved at the window where I think my mom's room was. We went inside, and I didn't hide my face when the beds with wheels came by. And when we turned down the hallway to my mom's room, I held my dad's hand a bit tighter because I saw something I'd never seen before. My grandma and grandpa Jenkins and my nene and yeye all sitting on chairs in the hallway. My nene and yeyes were sitting on one side, talking in Chinese, and my grandma and grandpa Jenkins were on the other side doing a crossword puzzle. But I didn't have too much time to stop and feel strange about seeing them all there together because I was too busy running toward them yelling, what does she look like? Does she have hair? How much? Can she talk? Is she big? Is she nice? We don't know, my yeye said, laughing and giving me a hug. You haven't met her yet? I asked, confused. Why, no, Celia, dear, my grandma Jenkins said, putting her arm around me. You're her big sister, which means you get to meet her first. Oh, I said. Suddenly I felt shy. Come on. My dad put his arm around me, and your mom's really excited to see you. So we walked into the room. My mom was in bed and looked tired but happy, and she gave me a big hug. And then she kept her arm around me, while my dad went over to what I thought was a table in the corner, but was really a little basket attached to a table, and he took out what looked like a small rolled up blanket, but it was my new little sister. I sat in one of the hospital chairs, scooched all the way back with my legs dangling in the air, and my dad put a blanket on my lap. And then he brought the baby over, and I held her just like Colleen had taught me. She was much, much smaller than I thought she'd be, and her face was all wrinkled and scrunched, which was a bit disappointing. In fact, she was like a blob. She also had more hair than the picture of her in my mom's stomach had let on, which wasn't really that fair. But she looked a lot friendlier than she had in that picture, too. And she made small sighing noises, and she smelled like powder and clean things. So even though when my parents asked what I thought, I shrugged and said, she's okay. I didn't give her back right away. I rocked her very gently, like Colleen's mom had shown me. And I said, hello, Blob. And my dad opened his mouth like he was going to say something, but I could see my mom shake her head and give him a parent look from across the room. And then he didn't say anything at all. So it can't have been that important. Then when I was ready, my dad called my grandparents in, and they took turns meeting my new little sister. My mom and dad were very tired, and my grandparents were busy meeting the blob and rearranging the flowers on my mom's window ledge. This was just Grandma Jenkins, actually. Also, I didn't bring flowers because I didn't know you were supposed to, but my mom said that the story I wrote for her was better than flowers. So that was good. It was about a walrus in the end. One of the nurses brought me a popsicle, which was very nice of her, and it meant I could just sit quietly on the edge of my mom's bed, eating my popsicle and holding her hand. She was busy talking to my grandpa Jenkins, and every once in a while saying things like, "Mom, give it a rest," when my grandma Jenkins tried to fluff her pillow or organize her bedside table. My dad and Nene spoke quietly in the corner in Chinese, my Nene rocking the blob, and my Yeye came over to sit by me. "How was your sleepover?" he asked. "It was fun," I said softly. "What'd you do?" "We played games," I said. "Oh, and we made waffles." And then I didn't feel so quiet anymore, and I told him all about Colleen's house and the stars and the dinosaur story, which he liked. I also told him about how Colleen's mom made vegetable stew, which was delicious, and which reminded me of suksang, which is around when my stomach began to make a rumbling sound, because it had been a while since I'd eaten, and popsicles aren't very filling, even if they are delicious. "You know," Yeye said, looking over at my dad, "Chinatown isn't very far away. We could get lunch there and celebrate." "Yes," I said, excited, "and we could get suksang and steamed tofu and salt and pepper pork," and I stopped suddenly because I'd forgotten that it wasn't just me and my mom and dad and Nene and Yeye. My grandma and Grandpa Jenkins were there too, and they wouldn't come to Chinatown, and would they feel left out? The room suddenly felt small, with all those people in it, and kind of quiet too. "Would you join us?" Yeye turned to them, smiling, but with a funny sound to his voice that I realized was his best behavior. "We were just talking about taking Cilla to lunch, and Chinatown is very close." Though he looked uncertainly at my grandma and Grandpa Jenkins. "We could go somewhere else too." And then all the adults, except for Nene, who was busy kissing the blob on the cheek, started talking at once. "Oh, we wouldn't want to intrude, Grandpa Jenkins. We would love to have you, Yeye. Kind offer, though, Dad. Needs our help settling in after all the excitement. Why, the bed's already come unmade again, and I haven't even seen the nurse for ages." Grandma Jenkins. "You know what?" Mom spoke the loudest of them all. "You should all go." "But," my dad started. "I'm exhausted, Nathan. I'm just going to sleep," my mom interrupted him. "You should go and be with everyone." And just then my Grandma Jenkins started refolding the blankets at the end of my mom's bed, and my mom gave my dad a look that made him say, "Okay," very fast, which is how I ended up in Chinatown with my dad, my grandma, and Grandpa Jenkins, and my Nene and Yeye. Chapter 13, Surprises. I didn't know how to feel about this. I leaned against my dad's arm and rested my head on his shoulder while Yeye explained the menu to Grandma and Grandpa Jenkins. I was glad that no one was talking to me, because even though I was with some of the people I love most and know best in the world, things didn't feel right. What if Yeye slurped his soup, or Grandma Jenkins asked for a fork, or Grandpa Jenkins thought the food was gross? What were we all going to talk about? And what if I was different around each of them? What if Nene and Yeye didn't like the jokes I told around Grandma and Grandpa Jenkins? Or Grandma and Grandpa Jenkins didn't like the games I played with Nene and Yeye, like making chopsticks holders or being silly with the spinning circle in the middle of the table. And even though I'd spent all the time wishing my grandparents could be together, I suddenly wished I could just be with my mom and dad, but not in the hospital, at home. When suddenly I heard my Grandma Jenkins say something in a loud, happy voice, something that wasn't English, but wasn't Chinese either. "Escargot! What a treat!" I looked up. She and my Yeye were smiling about something. "What's that?" I asked suspiciously. "Are you sure it's something you can get in Chinatown, Grandma?" "Escargot," my grandma said excitedly, "is one of my favorite foods, and it's French for snails." "Now I know it sounds odd," she said quickly, "but it's really quite delicious." "Oh," my dad said, patting my back and smiling. "Celia's had snails before." "Really?" Grandma Jenkins said. "I'm impressed, Cilla. That's a very sophisticated dish. I'm excited to try the Chinese version." "Oh," was all I could say. "Well, if you like snails, you should try," my Nene cut in. And then she and my grandma started talking about the menu, and they both seemed much more like they normally do, even if they were also a little too polite. And my Grandma Jenkins did an excellent job pretending to be interested when my Nene suggested we get beef intestine soup. We didn't order that one in the end, which I think was a good choice. While they talked, my dad leaned over to my Grandpa Jenkins and whispered, "Don't worry, we'll get pork fried rice too. and Grandpa looked so relieved that I giggled. Yaya ordered for all of us in Chinese, and it turns out that Grandpa Jenkins can use chopsticks, which was very impressive. And even though Grandma Jenkins doesn't know how to use them, she loved the chopsticks holders we made and asked me to teach her how to fold one. When the food came, my nene piled my plate high with white rice and zucchini, like she always does, and then she stopped with her chopsticks halfway out to another dish and turned to me with her eyebrow raised and a question on her face. I smiled and said, "Yes, please," and Nene gave me a big smile back, and soon we were all happily eating our lunch of rice, tofu, salt, and pepper, pork, beef with bitter melon, zucchini, and snails. Grandpa Jenkins ate mostly fried rice, though he did try the zucchini and liked it. He wouldn't try the snails, but I told him not to worry. Taste change, after all. He just weren't sophisticated enough yet. And even though Grandma Jenkins raised her eyebrows when Yaya picked up his soup bowl and slurped, she didn't say anything, and when my Grandpa Jenkins put soy sauce all over his fried rice, Nene acted like she hadn't seen him do it. After lunch, we went back to the hospital to see my mom. She and the blob have to stay there for a few more days, which is sad, but my dad was coming home with me, which was excellent news. My grandparents started saying goodbye, and my dad said I could hold the blob again, so I went back to the chair with the blanket on my lap and took another look at my little sister. She stared back up at me with tiny eyes and round cheeks that were soft and smooth when I touched them with my finger. And I was surprised because she really didn't seem all that bad. But as I looked up from the blob's scrunched up face, out the open door of my mom's hospital room, I saw something that surprised me even more. I saw my Nene and my Grandma Jenkins standing in the hallway, and I saw my Nene whisper something to my Grandma Jenkins. Grandma Jenkins nodded and whispered something back. And then they walked away from the door and down the hall, their heads close together. I watched them go, and even though this is what I wanted all along, I didn't feel happy. I felt sad. I've always wanted my family to be a family, a real one that spends time together and talks and whispers and goes to lunch. But no matter how much I've wanted this or how many stories I've told to each of my grandparents about how great the others are, the two sides of my family have always stayed far apart, so I thought that was just how they were meant to be. But it turns out now that isn't true. It turns out my family can be together. I just wasn't enough on my own to make this happen. I'm their granddaughter and a future author extraordinaire, and a Lee Jenkins, but it took the blob to make my family want to be a family. So I watched my grandmas go, and there was something tight and sad inside my throat, but I had another surprise because just then the blob made a soft sighing sound, and I looked down. And even though I was still sad and worried about having to share my family and my house and my toys, I looked at the blob and realized that maybe my little sister will never have to draw a family picture like the one I drew. Maybe the people in her portrait will stay together on the page. And this made me want to hold my sister a little tighter and a little longer, which seemed to be okay with her because she smiled. And then right before my eyes and in my arms fell asleep, which was nice. She snores too, apparently, which also made me giggle, but quietly, so I wouldn't wake her up. I'm a good big sister that way. That night I said goodbye to my mom and the blob and got in the car with my dad to finally, after 3 whole days, go home. And even though I was still feeling confused and a little sad, as the car turned on and started to make rumbling noises, I realized that I was tired too, so I closed my eyes and could smell the good smells coming from the bag of leftovers which Nene had insisted we take home. And I fell asleep. I told myself another story, this time not a made-up story, but a real-life one, about going home, about my dad tucking me into bed, and about the delicious lunch I would eat the next day of zucchini and escargot. Chapter 14, Traditions. We have a lot of traditions in my family, and several have changed since the blob came home. For example, my dad and I used to cook breakfast for my mom on Sundays. Then we'd all eat breakfast in their bed, and my dad would take me to the park to play. My mom and I would go grocery shopping on the weekends too, and our grocery store is amazing because kids get a free cookie at the bakery from a woman named Donna, and I'd get to push the shopping cart before it got too heavy. But now that the blob's here, my dad was too tired on Sunday to go to the park or to cook, and so we just had cereal, but my mom didn't eat with us because the blob started crying, and my dad went to the grocery store on his way home from work because my mom was too tired to go, which is a big theme in our house lately, so I didn't get to go with him, or get a cookie or say hello to Donna. There are also new traditions about sleep and noise. There's a lot of less sleep, and I have to make a lot less noise, which doesn't seem fair since the blob makes so much of it. There's also the tradition of changing diapers, which is interesting and happens on a special table, but makes some terrible smells. I'm hoping that one doesn't last long. But there are some nice traditions too. For example, every morning I get to help dress the blob and she looks amazing. My general rule is that she should be wearing as many colors and patterns as possible. And best of all, my mom and dad told me that because I'm being so great about helping, they're going to change the no sugary breakfast cereal rule. The next time they go to the grocery store, they're going to buy me a box of Choco Rex that's all for me, and I can eat it whenever I want. This has been maybe the most exciting part about being a big sister so far. There are some traditions, though, I don't think will ever change. They're called family traditions, and all my grandparents are really strict about them. For example, once a year I get a red envelope with the whole $10 inside from my nene and yeye. This is fun because I love presents and because it involves going to my yeye's favorite restaurant, which has a giant dragon statue in the lobby on the wall with glowing green eyes, and you can't find much that's better for the imagination than that. Also, there are fireworks. On the red envelope day, which is called Chinese New Year, the fireworks are tied to string and men light them in the streets. My mom says, "Keep your distance, Cilla," and the fireworks go pop, 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 and flash in little puffs of smoke. These kinds of fireworks are very different than the fireworks we get to see during another family tradition, which is the 4th of July. It's our family tradition to go to my grandma and grandpa's Jenkins house on the 4th of July. We eat hamburgers and yellow cake decorated with whipped cream, strawberries, and blueberries in the shape of a flag. This is a great family tradition because it's delicious. Sometimes there are traditions on both sides of my family on the very same day, like Thanksgiving. In the afternoon, we go to my nene and yeye's, who have us over along with all their friends from Chinatown. We sit everywhere at the table in the living room, on the floor, on the couch, and eat turkey and rice and spare ribs and bok choy. All the food is piled on one big table and none of the plates match. After afternoon Thanksgiving with my nene and yeye, we get in the car and go to my grandma and grandpa Jenkins' house, where my mom reminds us to act hungry. There we sit at the dining room table, which is somehow more special than the kitchen one, but I don't quite understand why. We eat off fancy plates with gold at their edges. By the end of the day, I'm very full of turkey, mashed potatoes, and pumpkin pie, not to mention the soy sauce, chicken, sticky rice, stuffing, and roasted duck. I like family traditions. They're fun. Plus, you get to dress up in your prettiest grown-up clothes and eat a ton. So when my grandpa Jenkins told me about a new tradition this past weekend that I'd never heard about, I was excited to try it. We were staying with my grandma and grandpa Jenkins so my grandma could help with the baby. That day, I was upstairs playing with the dollhouse that my grandparents keep for me. Dollhouses are great for making up stories, and I was in the middle of an epic drama that had suspense and 5 main characters, 3 love interests, 10 children, 2 imaginary dogs, and my teddy bear as an all-powerful dragon. Cilla, Grandpa Jenkins interrupted my story. I was wondering if you'd like to come on a special walk with me. A walk? I didn't even look up. That's how exciting my doll story was. I don't know, I'm kind of busy right now. Oh, it's not just an everyday kind of walk, he said. This was part of a very old, long-standing town tradition. I looked up. A tradition? He had my attention now. Yes, a tradition, he said, sitting down on the edge of the playroom couch. You see, your grandma and I live in a very old town, and there's a custom that dates all the way back hundreds of years ago to the first people who lived here. Every Sunday afternoon, without fail, the townspeople dress in their finest clothes and go for a walk in the local park, the one right by the old bridge. I considered this for a moment. Why haven't we done it before? Well, my grandpa said, scratching his head, because you're usually not here on Sundays, and most of all because this tradition is very old and special. You have to do it right, so I didn't want to suggest it if you didn't have your Sunday best to wear. That wouldn't have been fair to you, but as luck would have it, your grandma told me that you brought a very special dress here this weekend. Yes, I exclaimed, suddenly excited. My Jeong Sam, I just got it as an early birthday present. It's for special occasions. Golly, Grandpa Jenkins exclaimed. What luck! And so my Grandpa Jenkins and I left the house a half hour later, my grandpa looking fancy in a white suit, gold vest, red bow tie, and white handkerchief with yellow and red stripes in his pocket. On his head he wore what he calls his finest fedora, and he carried a brown cane with a silver horse head on top. I had on my brand new red Chianik sang, long and narrow at the bottom, with buttons made of cloth that loop at your neck. Mine has gold patterns all over it. It's the most beautiful thing I own. I've wanted a Chian scam for the longest time, and my Nana and Yaya decided that 9 was grown up enough to finally get one. And even though my birthday isn't for another 4.5 days, they gave it to me early because they were too excited to wait. Plus, I've been so good about helping with the blob. In a China scam, it's easy to feel like a princess. No glitter glue required this time. It's just so happened that my mom had bought my fancy gold slippers. I thought your grandma might like to see the whole outfit, she said, and just threw them in at the last minute. Golly, I replied, what luck. Grandpa Jenkins and I set off, dried leaves swirling at our feet. To the bridge, he said, pointing ahead with his cane. I took his arm and felt very grown up. So, Cilla, he said as we strolled, which is a fancy word for walking, what have you been up to this past week? Oh, good morning. He tipped his hat to some people on the street who were looking at us. They're not dressed up, I observed. Well, we are not at the park yet. Ah, I nodded, skipping along beside him. Well, this week's been very good. I told him about the last week of camp and about getting a letter that told me my 3rd grade teacher is called Mr. Flight, which is exciting because I wonder if he's a pilot or has wings. Good morning, a couple walking by said, smiling at us. Good morning, I waved back happily, though I turned to my grandpa and whispered in a very soft voice so they wouldn't feel bad. They're not dressed up either, and that they've just left the park. Young people these days, he said, shaking his head. They have no respect for traditions. Terrible. I shook my head too and made a noise like him, and then I waved at another couple who had just noticed us in our Sunday best and were probably feeling bad because they weren't dressed up either. I've been spending a lot of time at home and at Colleen's house because Mom and Dad are too tired to do things like go to the park or the zoo, I went on, but it's okay. Well, Grandpa Jenkins said, your mom tells me you're being just wonderful with the baby. I guess, I shrugged. I like it more than I thought I would, I admitted, but taking care of a little sister seems like a lot of work and responsibilities. Well, Grandpa Jenkins thought for a moment, it's true that there are a lot of responsibilities attached, but it can be fun too. And you also have a pretty big influence, as a big sister. Really? I asked, not quite believing him. It's true, he said. Why, the things you teach her and the stories you tell her will really matter. My older sister, your great aunt Annette, had me convinced that I wasn't really her brother. She told me that I'd been left on the doorstep by fairies or elves, and I believed her until I was 5 or 6. Not that you shouldn't do that, he added quickly. She got in trouble when our parents found out. Huh, I said. Great Aunt Annette is pretty great, which makes sense, I guess, because it's in her name. She does magic tricks at the dinner table, which makes my grandma make noises. But she does them anyway, which is very brave. I didn't know that she told stories, too. Excellent ones, for that matter. And I'd forgotten that Great Aunt Annette is my grandpa's sister. And I'd definitely forgotten that my Grandpa Jenkins is a little brother. Oh, good morning, my grandpa nodded to a group of women smiling in our direction. Don't you two look lovely, one of the women exclaimed. Thank you, I replied. It's a tradition. Have a nice morning, ladies, my grandpa said, touching his hat, which is a fancy way of saying hello and goodbye, and we kept walking. Grandpa, those women weren't even young people, and they weren't dressed up either. I put my hands on my hips. Something has to be done. Well, we'll just have to lead by example, Cilla. My dear, my grandpa said, glancing at his watch. His horse head cane made click-clack clicking sounds, and as it hit the wooden boards of the old bridge. Maybe I will like the baby someday, I said, stopping with him at the center of the bridge to look out over the small river that runs through his town. I like it more now, especially because I don't have to share my birthday. Yes, my grandpa said, looking out over the water. Only a few days to go. Are you excited? I nodded. Mom says I'll get to celebrate with you and Grandma Jenkins the night before, which I'm happy about. I asked for chocolate cake. My Grandpa Jenkins said. Yes, I agreed. Then I'll celebrate with Mom and Dad on my birthday, and with Nene and Yaya the day after. But I don't know if I'll have a party with my friends right away, because Alien F. Ben was away last week. And I didn't want to have a party if he couldn't come. And then school starts right after my birthday, like it does every year, so everyone will be busy. I'm sorry to hear that, Grandpa Jenkins said. Maybe you can celebrate with your friends another time. Yes, I said thoughtfully. That's what Mom said too. We'll see. Mom and Dad are really tired all the time and busy with the baby, so I don't know. Good morning, a jogger smiled as he ran past. Good morning, my grandpa replied. Good morning, I said, wishing I had a cap to pat also. People are very friendly here, I said after a moment. I think maybe it's because they feel guilty, because sneakers and running shorts definitely don't count as Sunday best. Quite right, Celia, my grandpa nodded, then glanced at his watch again. Say, we should probably turn back now. Your grandma wanted me home to run some errands, and you know how she is about being on time. I raised my eyebrows and nodded understandingly, because I did. My grandma Jenkins likes things to be just so. We headed back across the grassy green field, waving to the people who smiled at us, who were also not wearing their Sunday best. Thank you, Celia, my grandpa Jenkins said as we came up to his house. This has been a lovely walk. Thank you for taking me, I said, giving him his arm a hug. It's a very nice tradition, and I like being in my Sunday best, even if most people don't do it. Agreed, he said, opening the front door. After you, my dear. Do you mind telling your grandma we're back? I think she's in the kitchen. Of course not. I skipped to the kitchen door, only she's probably in our office because it looks like the kitchen light is off. I popped my head in just to check. Grandma? Grandma, are you? Surprise! The lights came on. I couldn't believe my eyes. There were blue streamers all over the ceiling and walls, and my mom was holding a cake that said, Happy Birthday, Celia. And next to her were Colleen and Alien-Faced McGee and Sally and Connor and the Tims and even Sasha. And my grandpa was behind me, grinning, and there in the very center of the kitchen, smiling and blowing little party trumpets, were my grandma Jenkins, and next to her, Nene and Yeye. Happy birthday, they shouted, and then it was all a jumble of noise and hugs and happy birthdays, and Colleen came bouncing up to me and said, I've had to keep this a secret forever. If it weren't for Alien Face reminding me, I would have forgotten and told you. And Alien-Faced McGee came over and shouted, Surprise, silly! And Sasha gave me a hug and said, I missed you, Celia. Summer break is so long. And it was only a few minutes later when my mom came over and said, Good surprise, that the shock began to wear off even a little. The best surprise ever. I threw my arms around her. Thank you. Thank your grandmas, my mom smiled. They've been planning this ever since I was in the hospital. And it was your grandpa's idea to have you wear your chance gown. So I didn't even have a chance to get over the surprise or the idea that when they'd been talking in the hospital, they were talking about me. I turned wide-eyed to my grandpa Jenkins. You mean, I said, hardly able to believe it, that the town tradition strolling in your Sunday best? Well, my grandpa said. My grandpa looked embarrassed. It's not exactly true, but your grandma's needed you out of the house, and you needed a reason to wear your dress. I hope you're not too disappointed. I considered all this slowly. I'm sad it's not real, I admitted, but that, I said, smiling at my grandpa Jenkins, was a great story. It was, he grinned. I've learned from the best after all. Now, he cleared his throat and turned to talk to everyone else. Let's give the kid her big present and have some cake. My dad and Yaya came in from the next room, and between them, on one of my grandma Jenkins' plant carts, they wheeled in something big and brown and just my size. A desk, I gasped. Made by your Yaya, my grandma Jenkins said proudly. Decorated by all of us, my Nene finished. I ran over to the desk to see, right on the top, 6 pairs of handprints pressed on in splashes of green and blue paint. A writing desk, my grandpa Jenkins grinned, as befits a best-selling author. I stood there in my special occasion shangzam, smiling so much that my cheeks began to hurt. And just this once, I'll admit that there may be some things writing can't do, because sometimes there really are no words.
Chapter 15. Priscilla Lee Jenkins. We ate chocolate cake and almond cookies, and Colleen got me a charm bracelet, which is the prize of my jewelry collection. It's now in total a plastic pearl necklace, flowered clip-on earrings, a tiara, and the charm bracelet. And I even hugged Alien-Faced McGee when I opened his present, a set of manatee-shaped erasers and zoo animal pencils, which he picked out for me all by himself. After cake and presents, we went out in my grandma and grandpa Jenkins' big backyard. My grandma carried the blob, who had slept through my surprise. My dad and Yee took my new desk outside, and Nine followed behind them carrying a small bucket of paint. Then Colleen and Alien-Faced McGee and all my friends dipped their thumbs in paint, and they put their thumbprints all around the edges of my desk. And then it was my turn. We thought you could put your handprints right here, my mom said, pointing to the front drawer where pens and notebooks would go. I thought for a moment. I looked at my grandma and the sleeping blob. Actually, I said, I think I'll save that spot for now. So I put my handprints on the sides of the desk. And my grandpa Jenkins took a picture of me doing it, and Colleen and Alien Face, and Sasha and Sally and Connor and the Tims cheered, and I was very happy. We all washed our hands, and the adults sat on the porch by my grandma's rose bushes, while the rest of us played, pushing leaves around in big piles and jumping into them, laughing. I took a break, though, as the afternoon went on, and went to sit on the grass. I picked a far-off corner, and I sat back for a moment, watching my friends run and play, and the adults talking by the house. I thought about Nai and Grandma Jenkins planning my party, and the idea of Yee making the desk, and Grandpa Jenkins making up a story about traditions just for me. I thought about how my friends had kept my party a secret because they wanted to surprise me. And I thought about my writing desk and all those handprints and the 14-hole thumbprints around its edges. So many that they made a ring around the entire desk. And I looked off for a minute in the other direction toward the trees of the neighbor's yard and the wooden brown fence just past them. And then the most amazing thing happened. At first I imagined it was a plane, then a bird, then a pterodactyl, but it came closer and closer, falling and falling, and I realized it was a huge cardboard box wrapped in tinfoil, hurtling toward the ground. I thought it would hit the neighbor's fence with a fiery crash, but at the last second, a parachute popped out, and the box landed with just a small thump on the grass in front of me. It wriggled, the cardboard crunched, and a door cut into the side of the box burst open. I did it, a man exclaimed, tumbling out of the box. He saw me, then froze. Cilla? He exclaimed. Cilla Lee Jenkins? It's really you? Yes, it's me, I said politely, because that's what you do when you meet new people. Who are you? I'm an inventor, he said with a bow. I came from the future. My time machine has finally worked. Wow, I said, looking at the cardboard box. That's impressive. Thank you. He took another small bow. My calculations, it seems, are a bit off, but it should be no problem at all to reset the machine and take me back to the right date, just about 9 years ago. This is very lucky, actually. Now I can be sure to pick a name you'll like. What will it be? Supernova Lilac? Roswitha Hemingway? Eleodora Smith? I paused. I think, I said after a long, long moment, I think I'm fine, actually. The time traveler looked shocked, but I thought you wanted a new name. One that's big and exciting and will look great in print. I know, I said, and I did, for a long time. A Priscilla Lee Jenkins isn't an easy thing to be, but I've gotten used to it, and now that I have, I just don't think I could be anything else. Oh, the time traveler said, looking disappointed. Okay. He ran his fingers through his hair. But there are lots of other things you can do, I said gently. Now that you've invented time travel, this is just the beginning. Plus, I think this probably makes you famous. You might want to look into that, actually. You may be onto something there. The time traveler wiped his nose, but did look like he felt better. Well, what about your little sister? He asked suddenly. I know you don't like her name and that you hate it so much you won't even say it. I bet I could go back in time and make her name a good one. Maybe Glimmerella. Thank you, but that's okay too, I said firmly. I think she should get a chance to figure it out for herself. It'll probably be hard, I admitted, but I'm her older sister, so I'll be there to help. The time traveler sighed. I understand. I'm just disappointed. Though, he said, smiling suddenly, I guess I can do lots of other things now that I've discovered time travel. Why, I could even go back in time and see a real-life Velociraptor. That's the spirit, I cheered. Well, he walked back to his cardboard box and pulled the door open, the foil squeaking as he went. I'm off. It's been an honor, Priscilla Lee Jenkins. You're my favorite author, and I've seen you in the future, you know. You signed a book for me, and a copy for my pet flying pig. Really, I asked. What am I like? You're very famous, of course. All your books are bestsellers, and there's lots of cake. I knew it. I smiled. Thank you. And she looks a lot like you, your little sister. She does? Why, yes, he said, as if it was the most obvious thing in the world. When she grows up, she doesn't look like a blob at all. You two have lots of family resemblance. It was a long moment before I replied. Thank you, Mr. Time Traveler, I said. Finally, I'm really glad I got to meet you. You too, he said with a smile and another tiny bow. Well, wish me luck. Good luck, I said. Have fun, and maybe don't get too close to the velociraptors. He was very nice and had discovered time travel and all, but he somehow didn't seem too bright, at least when it came to common sense. Right, he nodded. Then he gave a small wave and disappeared with a lot of clunking and shuffling back into the box. Here's a picture. The door swung shut behind him, and the box rose with a wobble, first slowly, then faster and faster, back up into the sky, and then it was gone. What are you doing, sweetie? My mom and dad had come across the yard, my mom holding the blob who was still asleep, and were standing next to me trying to see what I was looking at off in the distance. Oh, nothing, I replied, just imagining some things that needed to be taken care of for me. I put an arm around my mom's waist and rested my head on her still kind of big stomach. And I stopped and I looked up at the blob. I looked at her scrunched up face and I thought about the name my parents had given her. The name I never said. The name I thought was so terrible I wouldn't even write it down. And I said, for Gwendolyn. I have to admit, it didn't sound as bad as I thought that it would. Silly, my mom teased, putting an arm around me. Yes, I said, taking my dad's hand too, but only sometimes. And together we all walked back to the noise of the party with the bright, bright orange of the setting sun in the sky behind us, and we all lived happily ever after, Lee and Jenkins alike. The end. Epilogue. Plot twist. Ha! I tricked you. Tricking your reader is called a plot twist, and lots of best-selling novels have them. So I thought it would be a good idea to end my book with one too. Also, while happily ever afters are okay for fairy tales, I don't think they work for real life. Can you imagine how boring that would be? I mean, sure, I like it when things are happy, but when everything is perfect, there's very little room for drama or car chases. The plot twist is that my story isn't over after all. There are so many good stories left, like how, a few weeks later, when she was bigger and awake and a bit less breakable, I got to help Gwendolyn dip her hands in paint and put her handprints on the drawer of my writing desk, right at the front. She did a great job, and I was a very careful helper, though some paint may have gotten on the floor and the wall. Also my mom. And to top everything off, the day after my surprise birthday party, there was a car chase. It was on the way home from my grandma and grandpa Jenkins' house. I think it was an evil villain. Out to steal Gwendolyn, who looked great in the excellent outfit I'd chosen for her as always. Or maybe it was a bank robber who thought our car was filled with money and jewels instead of birthday presents and a very smelly diaper. My dad says it was just my grandpa Jenkins, who doesn't know the shortcut to our house and had to follow our car and his because we couldn't fit Gwendolyn's stroller in with my new desk. But I kept watch the whole time, just to be safe, like a responsible big sister. And when we turned corners, I yelled, "Faster, Dad, he's gaining on us," and "Lose him at the light," which added excellent excitement to the ride home. So it was definitely worth the new gray hairs my dad says I gave him. Gwendolyn clearly thought it was fun too, because every time I yelled, she also wanted to yell. And she was right to be happy. It made our story perfect, because you can't get much better than a car chase. Gwendolyn's getting bigger and is growing even more hair, which isn't fair. But she also smiles when she sees me and giggles when I blow air on her toes, which I like. And even though it'll be a while before she can really and truly make up stories with me, I've discovered that making up stories about her is a lot of fun. So far, she's been an earthworm, a slug, a puppy, and a troll. Tomorrow I'm going to make up a story where she goes to the moon. And my mom's even said I can push Gwendolyn's stroller while I pretend that we're astronauts, as long as I don't let go and promise not to run. So as you can see, Gwendolyn is much more exciting now than she was as a blob in my mom's stomach. And even though it will be a long time before she can read, though hopefully she'll learn a bit faster than I did, that hasn't stopped me from reading to her. In fact, just yesterday I started reading Gwendolyn what I hope will be her favorite book someday. This one. I could only read a little before she started trying to roll away, but she wanted to eat my book, which I think means she likes it. And I know she'll appreciate it a lot later on, when she can read my life story and hear about her family and learn important lessons from my experiences, such as Choco Rex cereal is very disappointing and not what the commercials say it is. The marshmallows don't look anything like dinosaurs, and they just make the milk a gross, funny tasting brown color. Which means I'll have a big influence on my little sister. She'll grow up hearing my stories after all. I'm starting to see the problem with writing your life story between the ages of 8.5 and 9. There are just so many more exciting things that keep happening to me. Tales of wonder and struggles, cheese and stegosauruses, imaginary safaris with Colleen. We're going on one next week. There will be polar bears. Playing gnomes with Mrs. Tibbs, and of course, drama, which sells. And to add to all this, my Nai and Yee have promised to get me another writing notebook once this one is all used up, because I'm such a good big sister, and because even though my book wasn't done in time for me to become world famous before Gwendolyn was born, I'm still destined for literary greatness and need to practice for the day when I'll be a best-selling author. So it really doesn't matter that this is the last page in the journal my grandma and grandpa Jenkins gave me. My book is over, but my writing isn't, which means that I, Priscilla Lee Jenkins, future author extraordinaire, will be here again soon at the special writing desk made just for me, starting at a brand new chapter 1. And that, for now, really is the end. Hope you enjoyed the story as much as I did.